before 1850, 1860, that hadn't yet happened. The Democrats were basically the Confederate Party, the pro-South Party, and the Free Press was a Democratic newspaper. And at that time, there was no attempt to even hide your political leanings in a newspaper. If you were Democrat, you were a hardcore Democrat, and everybody knew it. If you were Republican, you were a hardcore Republican, and everybody knew it. And we kind of getting, America's kind of come back to that now with the rise of Fox News and MSNBC, where they don't even attempt to show any kind of objectivity. They clearly are in one camp or another. Well, that's how it was in the 1830s when the Michigan Intelligentsia Democratic Free Press was founded, which is the Detroit Free Press. So now we get to 1863. They've been around for 30 years. And one of the things they've been doing for 30 years is attacking the whole idea of black people living in the area of Detroit. They're anti-black, and now in the middle of the Civil War, they're pro-Confederate, they're anti-Lincoln, they're anti-emancipation, and the Emancipation Proclamation has just passed, and they've been hyping up the white Detroit community to be anti-black as well. They're basically writing articles that black people will be coming to Detroit and they'll take your jobs, they'll be moving next to you, they're not as intelligent, they're not smart, they're not this, they're less than, they're inferior to whites. And they're going to marry your daughters, your wives, all of this furor is being built. And one of the groups that, of course, begins to take on this are the poor whites in Detroit. You know, wealthy whites who actually helped found the Detroit Free Press. They're anti-black, but they do not join in this race riot. Mainly poor whites do, particularly poor whites who were of Irish and Scotch background who live in the area that is now known as Corktown. So they are here, and because this becomes a central spot for groups to meet, and the city hall is right there. And, every day of the Civil War, the post office is over there. People are waiting for news. What's going on? Is the war ended? You know, what's going on? And William Faulkner, a black man, not the writer William Faulkner, a black man named William Faulkner is charged with molesting a 9-year-old white girl. And the Free Press builds this up. See, we told you what's going to happen when these black people come from the South and they come to Detroit. We told you, you got to do something. You can't depend on the law. You can't depend. So the Free Press creates a frenzy among the poor white community to do something about this. And William Faulkner, coming out of court, on his way to the jail. They're on his way to take him to the jail, and there's a crowd out ready to kill him, ready to lynch him. The police fire a shot in the air over the crowd to get them to back away, and then they go back. They can't get through the crowd they felt that they would probably either be killed or attacked, and William Faulkner, of course, would have been lynched. So they go back into the City Hall building. The crowd goes out into the Lower East Side of Detroit and attack random black people. They burn 30 buildings. And some of those buildings, of course, are white-owned buildings that hired black people for work. They kill a number of people, after the number of black people leave Detroit and go to Canada until the Civil War ends, to escape being killed, and about months later, the girl recants and says, no, I was never molested by William Faulkner. I was told to say this. So William Faulkner is released, but by this time, this race riot has already occurred. People have already died, and some black people have gone to Canada to escape being killed. Now, everybody knows about the New York City draft riots, or most people know about the New York City draft riots that happened that same year, very similarly, stoked by the Democratic newspaper in New York, All the Democratic papers in the North were Confederate-leaning papers. So they were writing stories during this Lincoln period, during the Civil War period, that were, number one, attacking Lincoln, demeaning black people, targeting black people as the reason for the war and the reason why you poor Irish or German or Scottish immigrants are being drafted. Because this is the first United States draft. The rich, of course, can pay to get out of the draft by paying $300. So the Civil War is mainly a poor war on the Union side. Poor man's war. Rich people don't fight. They're drafted, but they can pay $300, and then they don't have to join. They don't have to fight. So these poor people are looking for a reason why I have to potentially lose my life. And the Democratic newspapers think it's because of them. It's because of these black people. That's the reason. And so in the New York City draft riots, very similar to what happened here in Detroit, the black community was targeted, and black people were lynched during the draft riots in New York. The black hospital was burned. So black leaders were being looked for, searched for by the mobs so that they could be killed. All of this was going on in New York, and it happened here in Detroit on a smaller level, but most of us who live in Detroit know nothing about this story. But it started right here. Almost fitting, because Campus Martius, although it sounds nice, and we think of it as a park now because of the beach thing here and the nice fountain, and then you have the music area over there on the grass, and then in the winter, that's the ice skating rink is over there. So we think of Campus Martius primarily as a park now, but in Campus Martius in Latin means war camp. So that's really what this was in the War of 1812, in the war of, in the Civil War. The military came here to do their drills before going to the battlefront. In the Civil War, the battlefront, of course, would be in the South. And in the War of 1812, it was sometimes in this area because they were fighting soldiers from Canada. Of course, the major battle in this area was the Battle of River Raisin, which was in the War of 1812. The Battle of Gettysburg. Regiment, 19th Indiana Regiment, and the 24th Michigan Regiment, all together made up what is known as the Iron Brigade.
Last point again.
Yes, the 24th Michigan Infantry, which was part of the Iron Brigade, which did their military drills here, sustained the largest amount of casualties at the Battle of Gettysburg of all other regiments. Sorry, Detroit was the capital of Michigan before Lansing. Okay, so when the Michigan Territory began, Detroit was the capital. And this was where the Capitol building sat. You could see it straight from the Capitol building, straight from Jefferson or from the water, from the river. You could look straight up Griswold and see the Capitol. The Capitol right here, the building stood. So like I said, you saw the building, the front of the building, right from know anything about, and that even their memory is being removed. So you have the Capitol building here. Of course, once the Capitol moved to Lansing in 1847, this became a school. Not black people couldn't go to this school. Even women, white women couldn't go to this school. So it was an all-boys school at first. And it was known as the Capitol Union School. However, the custodian at this building was named George Dolerson. George Dolerson, a black man who was the custodian, was also one of the leaders of the Underground Railroad in Detroit. So even though he was the custodian at the Capitol Union School, he was also one of the leaders and organizers of the abolitionist movement in Detroit. He kept the keys to a building that was across the street known as Finney's Barn, Seymour Finney's Barn, which was where the Detroit Savings Bank building is now, which is, of course, going to become the Roman Catholic Archdiocese. So that brownish building with the crane in front of it was the site of Seymour Finney's barn. Seymour Finney was a tailor. He was a white man who was a tailor who opened up a bar, kind of like a saloon type bar, and then parlayed that into opening up an inn, kind of like a motel of the 1800s. So he opened up this inn, this motel, and people needed to put their horses and their wagons somewhere. So he had a barn built right there on that corner for them to store their wagons and their horses, all of their travel materials. And but behind 2 tons of hay in that barn was a hiding place for black people who were escaping from slavery. And the person who administered this hiding place was George Dolison, the black man who was the custodian at the Capital Union School. So Seymour Finney, his barn, him being an abolitionist, and George Dolison being the person who was really running his abolitionist operation. Once you made it there, your last stop was the river, because Finney owned a boat, and from that boat you would go over into Canada. Finney's barn becomes a major site from the 1850s to the beginning of the Civil War. And let's go over here. And when you're looking at the Michigan Historic Marker for Finney's barn, one of the things that we always have to talk about when we talk about the abolitionist movement and the Underground Railroad, for most of the period of time that we've been talking about this history, or this history has been talked about in America, it's been taught mainly as a white hero story. You know, black people were helped and saved by white people who were freeing them from slavery. So mainly Quakers get the credit, or whites in general were the leaders of the Underground Railroad. There was a series on PBS called The Abolitionist, and the only black abolitionist that was focused on the series, it was a 3-part series, was Frederick Douglass. You know, the rest was all, you know, Levi Coffin and Garrett and Henry Lloyd Garrison. So whites basically were given hero stats. And even here in this Michigan Historic Site, which is great that it talks about Finney's barn, you see Finney, Seymour Finney, the white abolitionist, being acknowledged, which he should be. He should be acknowledged for what he did. But what's missing is George Dolison. George Dolison, who was the custodian at the Capital Union School, who was the person who actually was running the Underground Railroad operation that was occurring in Finney's barn. We find out about Seymour Finney not because Seymour Finney told us that he was an abolitionist who was working on the Underground Railroad. We found out about Seymour Finney from his son, Jared Finney. Jared Finney became one of the first United States prosecutors. And he wrote about what his father and George Dolison were doing when he was growing up. He was like, they were helping black people escape from slavery. I would wake up and see black people being hidden from slave catchers in my home. And so we found out that from Jared Finney, who there was a school in Detroit named after. Finney High School was named after Jared Finney. It's no longer called Finney High School, it's East English Village Preparatory Academy. So the whole history of Finney has been removed from that school. But on top of that, even here, when we're talking about Finney, and we found out about Finney at the same time that we found out about George Dolison. So we found out about the black abolitionists at the same time we found out about the white abolitionists. But here, on this site, on this marker, there's no mention of the black person who was involved in helping other black people escape from slavery. You only can hear about Seymour Finney. So again, the story of the Underground Railroad is still being taught primarily as a story of white heroes saving black people, and black people basically not saving themselves. Now, just a cursory look, if you just a glance at the Underground Railroad, you know about Harriet Tubman, who escaped from slavery herself in Maryland and went back over 13 more times and saved 300 other black people from slavery. And then in the Civil War, help